Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, independent media that won't reinforce tribalism. We have one planet. Nobody is leaving, and let us reason together. Let's get right into it. I got a show question for the show today. Can you show us some insights on the decisions to halt the implementation of a new disability benefit determination methods for veterans? This is our plan to open up the episode today. So let's get right into it, and I'm not going to mix words here, because why would I? So, this week, veterans gave a loud no to the Department of Veterans Affairs. And for right now, the Veterans Affairs Department pretended to listen. Pretended is the key word in that sentence. So, the VA released a new disability ratings rule that would have radically changed how compensation is calculated for millions of disabled veterans under the rule. VA medical examiners would actually factor in how well a veteran's medication or treatment reduced symptoms. So if the treatment made the condition functionally better, then the veteran's disability rating and compensation tied to it would go down. And that means exactly what you think it means. Vets would earn less money if medicine they got worked. And that's according to the Marine Corps Times. The backlash was immediate and fierce, as it should be, because veterans groups, lawmakers, and rank-and-file service members called it a penalty for healing. And it was forcing veterans into a perverse choice: stay sick or pay to get better and lose benefits. The optics were so bad that the Veterans Administration didn't even wait. They halted implementation of the rule before it even went into effect, promising to collect more comments and reassess. Now, that is a optics thing and a rare retreat from the department on major policies like this. But here's the twist, and the rule hasn't been fully rescinded yet. It is technically still on the books, but it is not being enforced. And veterans are being put in this situation, and they're pushing lawmakers and the Veterans Administration to kill it for good. So no future leadership can revise it. So here's the real talk about this situation. If you earn disability pay because of a service-connected disability, injury, or illness, it's not just compensation. It's the recognition of sacrifices, dollars for daily survival, and its dignity for years of active duty service. What the Veterans Administration under the Trump administration tried to do, even if they claim it was a clarification, is they looked at many vets and they said this is what we can use as an attempt to shore up budgets on the backs of the wounded. And the Veterans Administration was going to push it through because, they don't really care about veterans. And veterans groups and vets smelled it immediately. And this fight is bigger than a single rule. It's about who gets the seat at the table when decisions are made about veterans' lives. So the VA halted the implementation of the new disability determination, the method that would have allowed them to reduce a veteran's compensation if medication improved symptoms. And you just have to let that sit in. You get injured in service to your country. You survive, you medicate, you stabilize yourself to be functional, and then the government will step in and say, well, since you're functioning better, maybe you deserve less. Now, that is not administrative tickering. That is a type of moral confusion. Now, the VA says they're pausing the rule but it's only after the backlash. Fine, good, pressure works. But understand something here. This isn't a new energy. This is actually old muscle memory in American policy. The country has a long history of wrapping veterans in flags on Memorial Day and then treating them like a budget line item in July. So let me walk through some very quick historical examples. There's what we know as the bonus army, and this is when veterans were met with bayonets. So if you go back to history in 1932, thousands of World War I veterans marched on Washington because they were promised bonuses for their service and deferred pay, and the Great Depression had crushed them. And the veterans, of course, like most of the people in the government, they needed relief. The government's response was tanks. President Herbert Hoover ordered the Army to clear out the United States World War I veterans, and General Douglas MacArthur led troops against unarmed veterans in what became known as the Bonus Army. American soldiers gassed and dispersed by the very institution that they once served. So when people act shocked that veterans distrust bureaucratic promises, they shouldn't be. I am not shocked because I'm a student of history and psychology, and history has taught me to never trust people because people are the worst, and to never trust governments because it's run by said awful people. The GI Bill is my second example here. Generous on paper, but not actually equal. So the GI Bill, the myth about it is it transformed America and it helped build the middle class. But if you look at the whole story about said GI Bill, you recognize that black veterans in the South were systematically denied equal access to the education benefits. They were systematically denied the housing benefits. The banks systematically refused to give them the loans. Colleges refused to admit them. They blocked them from getting an education. And local administrations historically obstructed them. So the narrative that America always takes care of its veterans is silly. It's not historically accurate. At best, it's incomplete. America sometimes takes care of some veterans when it's optically advantageous to do so, and they do it unevenly. The most present example that I saw in my own family, sadly, is Agent Orange. Now, for decades, the United States government denied this. Vietnam veterans came home with cancers and unexplained illnesses linked to a chemical exposure. For years, the United States government denied responsibility. Only in 1991 did Congress pass the Agent Orange Act, acknowledging the connection and expanding benefits. Now think about that. 1991. The war in Vietnam officially ended in 1975. Recognition came years later. Now, that is not oversight. That is resistance to the harm that was caused. The Walter Reed situation pops right in my head because the mold that everybody knew about, and the bureaucracy and the neglect. And this was in 2007 when investigative reports exposed horrific outpatient conditions at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Molded rooms, endless paperwork, wounded soldiers navigating a maze of unconcerned indifference. Again, public outrage, forced reform. Again, change came only after it had been exposed. Pattern after pattern after pattern. So when I bring it back to this VA rule, I think about it like this. When veterans heard the VA disability determination, the method might reduce compensation if treatment improved symptoms, they didn't see a nuance because it was a nuance. They saw history. and they heard your suffering does not matter anymore because your suffering is too expensive. And let me be clear about something. Disability compensation isn't charity, and it's not welfare. It's a contractual obligation that the United States government actually hates that they have to pay. Because what they actually want the veterans to do is to die faster. You signed a blank check and it included your life. The nation signed one back, and here's the ethical problem. Trying to compensate the medication response misunderstands trauma and chronic injury. So you can stabilize PTSD symptoms and still carry vocational limitations. You can manage pain and still have reduced earning capacity. You can function and still be permanently altered. Compensation is not about how you look on your best medicated Tuesday afternoon. And veterans understood that immediately. And the bigger question we have to ask for this show is this isn't just about one rule. It's about America structurally drifts towards forgetting veterans once the parade ends. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. War is actually popular because Americans are very sick people. Wars are symbolic because it proves to Americans that they can do good, they can be good at something. And that's, of course, killing unarmed people around the world, are bullying their way to some sort of whatever. War gives Americans meaning because they don't have anything else. Suck at education. Not number one on anything in any chart, but we're number one at bombing people who could never defend themselves against the number one military. And war gives Americans a sense of purpose because the war is symbolic. And the veterans are very expensive. And bureaucrats respond to expensive things. Now, I am very anti-government, and I don't trust the government because I don't trust people, and people runs governments. And I try my best to temper that on this show, but I'm not anti-VA. The VA at its best saves lives every day. Now, I know men and women who care literally kept them here. Now, so this isn't to demonize its vigilance, but it's, if not for the public backlash, this rule would have quietly moved forward. So the question for all of us is, are we honoring veterans with rhetoric or with policy? And are we willing to fund the true cost of war long after the battlefield goes quiet? And that's the real question. Everything else is nothing more than a stupid thing you put on your car that says, I support the troops, when all actuality, you care as much about the troops as you care about, I don't even want to get into the comparisons because I was going to say your favorite football team, but you actually care about them more than you care about the troops because you at least pay for them. Thank you for the question, and I'll get right back to more on the Darrell McClain Show.
1 in 7 men are called NEETs. They're not in education, they're not employed, and they're not in training. Effectively, you have the deepest pocketed companies in the world that represent 40% of the S&P who have one mission, and that is to sequester you from your family. And the way they do that is we used to think sex sells. We figured out there's something that sells better than sex, and that's rage. So you have a group of young men whose prefrontal cortex doesn't catch up to a woman until it's 25, is looking for that immediate dopa, and they think, I can have a reasonable facsimile of life online. Why go through the pecking order of having friends when I have Discord and Reddit? Why go through the BS of putting on a tie and navigating the corporate world when I can trade stocks or crypto on Coinbase or on Robinhood? And why would I go through the humiliation, the expense, the rejection, the perseverance of trying to establish a romantic relationship when I have life like porn? Big tech is not our friend. The bottom line is they are doing everything they can to sequester you from the most meaningful, important thing in your life, and that is relationships. Get off your
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Has anybody ever told you you were over opinionated? How about this one? You can talk about everything you like, but don't talk about religion. Don't talk about faith. Don't talk about politics. My name is Jerome McClain, host of Jerome McClain Show, and I want to introduce you to a show called Over Opinionated with my friend from Southwest Virginia, Josh Scott. Josh has always been told he has been over opinionated. He always tried to hold back these opinions, but he tried to back them up when he had to say something with facts and logic. Since he's grown up in many ways, he had to change a lot of his views and his opinions, as a lot of people should. He's not a millionaire from Fox News or CNN. He's just a hard-working, blue-collar type of guy. Give Josh Scott a shot at Over Opinionated with Josh Scott. You can find him on patreon.com/overopinionated at 679. You can also check him out on Twitter at NRV_guy79. Over Opinionated with Josh Scott, where he is this soft-spoken guy telling you the truth. We talk about a lot of serious topics on this show. One very serious topic is women's health. One company that stood out to me was vslay.com, because the owner is very transparent about her own struggles in the women's health department and has great customer service, great deals, and frequent sales. You can check her out, her great customer service, products about women's health, and frequent sales at www.vslay.com. That is www.vslay.com.
Welcome back to the show. So let me slow this down a bit, and I'm naming this segment the Covenant After the War, because this is really about regulation. And it's about regulation when it should be about covenant. And I'm going to put it this way. When a nation sends men and women into war, it is not just deploying assets. It's entering into a binding moral agreement. You sign a contract when you enlist, but the country signs one as well. You agree to go wherever they send you, and they agree to carry the cost of that when you come home changed. That's the deal. And here's where it bothers veterans when they hear about disability formulas being adjusted based on how well medications work. It sounds like the country is trying to negotiate a new deal after the damage is done. Disability compensation is not charity. Disability compensation is not a handout, nor is it a favor. It is a recognition that war leaves residue. You can medicate anxiety and still have nights where sleep won't come. You can treat pain and still never move the same again. You can stabilize depression and still carry a nervous system that never fully stands. Medication does not erase injury. It manages it. And management is not restoration. So when we start trying to tie compensation to how well someone performs under pharmaceutical support, we risk turning war wounds into performance metrics. And that is the moral category error. War is not a performance issue. It's a sacrifice issue. You cannot ask someone to risk their life in Fallujah, Kandahar, Baghdad, Helmand, and then later ask whether they are functioning well enough to reduce what you owe them. Because here's the truth most people don't like to say out loud. War is popular in abstraction, and veterans are expensive in reality. We budget for tanks. We debate healthcare for those who drove them. We authorize force quickly, and we deliberate compensation slowly. The pattern has shown up again and again in American history, and not because Americans are uniquely different, than most people because Americans are evil, just like everybody else. And institutions drift towards cost as a way of containment. And veterans are nothing more than line items. But a covenant is not supposed to be a line item. If Americans, which they claim they do, believe in just war theory, and many of those people are the loudest voices in the country, then they also must believe in the aftermath of the war. Because justice does not end when the last round is fired. Justice has to extend into a rehab clinic. It has to extend into the therapy office. It has to extend into a disability evaluation room. And here is something else. Disability ratings are not about your best medicated Tuesday afternoon. They're about a long-term earning capacity, a quality of life, and a permanent alteration of your body, your mind, your soul due to your service. A soldier, a sailor, an airman, a marine, a coastie, who learns how to function through PTSD is not less injured because he can or she can white knuckle their way through a meeting. A marine whose pain is controlled by medication and drugs and alcohol is not healed. They have figured a way to manage, and there's a difference. And if we are honest, what veterans fear the most is not the rule. It's not one rule. It's a direction of travel. They fear that the language of efficiency slowly erodes the language of obligation. They fear that improvement becomes a pretext for rejection. They fear that healing becomes financially risky. And that should concern all of us. Because the incentive structure of a nation matters. You never want to create a system where veterans subconsciously thinks, if I get better, I'll lose all support. That's corrosive. The goal should always be restoration without penalty, strength without suspicion, recovery without recognition. And let me say this as someone who understands the culture. Veterans don't want to be dependent. They want to be capable. But capability doesn't erase the cost. When the country called, they answered. The least we can do is answer when the bill comes due. If we can afford a war, then we can afford the warrior. If we can fund a deployment, then we can defund a disability. If we can authorize force, we should be able to authorize care. Otherwise, let's be honest about what we're doing here. Because a nation that calculates the cost of healing more carefully than the cost of war has already drifted from moral wisdom. And wisdom, not sentimentality, is what sustains republic. That's the real issue. Not a rule, a covenant. And covenants, once broken, are practically impossible to rebuild. I'm going to close the show out by doing something that I want to try to do at the end of a lot of the segments. And I want to talk about psychologically, because I am a counselor, an ordained pastor, etc. I want to talk about how to stay sane in an age of constant alarm bells. Because if you listen to this episode about policy, about obligation, and a moral drift, you might feel something that starts to creep in, especially if you watch the news and history like I do. And it's fatigue. because we live in an age where bad news doesn't just knock, it barges in every single day. War, corruption, economic anxiety, institutional failure, scandal, collapse. And your nervous system was not designed for this. Human beings did not evolve to handle immediate harm like we do every day. Humans evolved to handle immediate local threats, a storm, a predator, a rival tribe. We did not evolve to absorb global catastrophes in high definition every day before we even get breakfast. Psychologically, this creates what researchers sometimes call ambient threat exposure. Your brain can't distinguish between danger happening down the street and danger happening in another continent when it's streamed into your hand. So your body reacts, your heart rate rises, your cortisol climbs, sleep gets shallow, irritability increases. You think you're just staying informed, but your nervous system actually thinks you're under siege. And here's the philosophical problem here. You are being asked to emotionally process more suffering than any human generation in history without having any direct agency over most of it. That creates helplessness. And helplessness, if unaddressed, becomes despair. So how do you cope? Let me give you something simple but profound. Limit your exposure without abandoning awareness. You do not owe the algorithm your peace. You cannot be informed without knowing, but you can be informed without being saturated. There is a difference between vigilance and self-harm. If your consumption of news leaves you chronically dysregulated, that's not moral superiority. That is a nervous system overload. Second, shrink the circle of control. Now, the Stoics talks about this long before modern psychology. Control is what is within your reach. Release is what is not. You cannot fix global corruption tonight. You can check on a friend. You can discipline your body. You can pray. You can train. You can build something small in faith. Agency heals what helplessness corrodes. Third, build embodied anchors. This is where psychology and pastoral wisdom meet. Your body needs signals of safety, regular sleep, physical movement, sunlight, real human conversation, laughter, worship. You cannot scroll your way into peace. You must practice it, and peace is not denial, it is regulated presence. Fourth, accept that darkness has always existed. Every generation believes it is living in an unprecedented collapse. But just read the history. Empires have risen and fallen. Wars have ravaged continents. Plagues have emptied cities. And yet human beings have always built families, written poetry, raised children, loved deeply, and buried their dead with dignity. The presence of darkness does not cancel the possibility of goodness. It never has. And finally, and this is a pastoral reminder that you are finite. You are not called to carry the weight of the entire world. This is the reason Scripture says, cast your burdens. Because some burdens are not structurally designed for your spine. You can care without collapsing. You can be informed without being consumed. You can fight for justice without forfeiting your joy. But it requires discipline. It requires boundaries. It requires choosing what actually enters your mind. And if I can say this plainly, if your emotional state is constantly reactive, constantly outraged, constantly anxious, that is not spiritual maturity. That is a nervous system exhaustion masquerading as righteousness. And exhaustion makes you manipulable. Calm people are actually hard to control. Grounded people are harder to inflame. Regulated people make wiser decisions. So in a world of constant negative information, your resistance is not panic. It's steadiness. It's presence. It's tending your own garden while caring about the field. You do not need to numb yourself. You do not need to deny reality. But you must protect your mind the way you would protect your home, because your mind is your dwelling place. And if the world is loud, you must learn to cultivate inner silence. That is not retreat. That is strength. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show. The Jerome McClain Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show.